Hey guys, welcome to Introduction to JavaScript course. We at Coding Bootcamps are very excited to have you here. Before we begin, let's look at the session outline. Alright, so we'll begin this session by understanding how we can learn JavaScript. I will give you some tips on how to learn JavaScript and practice so that you can start building applications. Next thing is we're going to learn the difference between web design and web development. You should already know this if you've taken our HTML and CSS course, but if not, then I highly recommend you complete that course before you join this one, because I will be covering a lot of JavaScript to manipulate the HTML and CSS files. So if you're not aware of HTML and CSS, you might have trouble catching up with this course. Next thing I'm going to cover is to understand how the JavaScript works, after which we'll be covering the major JavaScript frameworks. Now, mind you, these are not in detail, so we do have some different sessions or different courses based on these frameworks. You're welcome to check them out at Coding Bootcamp's website. And I'm going to end this session by making sure that we have all the necessary tools and the software installed to start learning and building applications using JavaScript. So let's begin. Alright, so I want to welcome you to this course. I'm sure you have covered HTML and CSS before, and now we'll be covering JavaScript. Now we already know how to build a website. We'll be learning JavaScript in order to add some functionality on top of that website so that the user can make changes on the website's data and it can be more user interactive, right? So let's begin.
Alright, so let me introduce myself. My name is Kaustubh. I know it's hard to pronounce, but you can call me by my initials. I've been a full stack web developer for past 5 years now. Um, I work at a company called Indicate Digital that I co-founded in 2018. Before that, I worked at a startup incubator in Chicago called 1871. I've been teaching at coding boot camps and high school technology services since 2016, and I've been taking online classes for students from Canada and United States. All right, so about this course. So we will be covering Introduction to JavaScript. I will not be covering the very advanced topics that are related to JavaScript. So we'll be mostly focused on the fundamental programming concepts of JavaScript, as well as manipulation of DOM, that is the HTML, throughout this course. If you want to take advanced JavaScript, I highly recommend you finish this course first, get a bit of more practice, and then move on to the advanced concepts, because advanced concepts do follow something called functional programming, and if you're not aware of that paradigm, it will be hard to catch up. All right, so how is this course structured? Okay, so look at this from a piece of a puzzle, right? First of all, the first task is to get the puzzle pieces ready, and then make sure that you have the puzzle board and you place one piece at a time until you solve the puzzle. So this is how I look at the course. So this is what I mean by puzzle pieces. So you have to get the basic concepts clear. You have to get the basic concepts very thorough, and so that you can start building application block by block. So think of an application like a complete puzzle, right? And this is how all of the learning should go naturally for all of the programming language that you're trying to learn. All right, how to follow this course. So the three key elements that you need to follow, and you have to reiterate them every time. Um, First is the learn. Obviously, you need to apply the first principles thinking here. If you want to if you want to build a great application, you should start building by writing a great function. Okay, so first thing is learn. Second thing is practice. Practice, practice, practice. You will not get good at it without practice. I can tell you, if you don't practice it is going to be very hard to understand programming. And the last thing is obviously build. You have to apply what you have actually learned. So I encourage you to build big projects on your own, as well as look out for some open source projects that are out there that you can start contributing to. This will not only help you understand the fundamentals of programming and JavaScript, but it will also help you understand how the community works around these programming languages, and you can be a part of it. All right. So what we will have in this course is we'll focus on 3 projects. So we'll have 2 more sessions after this that will cover the fundamentals of programming, but after that we'll focus on the projects themselves. Okay. Um, I firmly believe that projects are a way to learn and not just reading the fundamental concepts. So let's see what the projects are. So we'll start by building a simple calculator. So this is just your basic arithmetic operations: addition, multiplication, division, subtraction, and modulus, right? So this is a very simple application, but we'll have a front end UI. So that is, the user will be allowed to enter 2 values, and then we will perform the arithmetic operation on those 2 values and print out the results. One of the projects is to build a to-do application using HTML and JavaScript. So you might be using um, pen and paper to write down the tasks of your day, or you might also be using an application called Wunderlist or Google Keep or whatever other application you might use. But what we are going to try to use JavaScript is to learn how to create this application from scratch. We won't be building a world-class application, I'll tell you right now, but I'll give you the basic understanding of how to start, and then maybe you can build something on top of it. I'd like to get surprised by what you build. And the last project that we're going to build is a reading list. Now, in the reading list, I'm sure you'll be using Amazon's Kindle or Apple Books or Google Books, and you may have books that you want to read from time to time, books you may have left incomplete, um, books that you want to take notes from, you know. So we'll be creating a reading list that will just list the books, and you'll have option of read or not read. Okay. This will help you understand how the Boolean value as well as the JavaScript objects work. All right, so what are the requirements for the course? So the first thing you need to have is a good computer. I highly recommend getting an actual personal computer rather than working on an iPad or a tablet computer. I do not recommend using a phone because we will be using a lot of development tools that are provided in popular web browsers such as Google Chrome. So I highly recommend you get a computer with Mac OS or Windows 10 or Ubuntu and a good internet connection. We need internet connection because we will be downloading some of the libraries that are essential for building our projects. You need to have the basic understanding of HTML and CSS. Since this is a purely JavaScript course, I won't be covering HTML and CSS at all. But you can always check HTML and CSS courses at our website at Coding Bootcamps. Again, so HTML and CSS is a prerequisite for this course. I highly recommend you complete that course before you start taking this course. Alright, so a quick refresher of web design and web development. So thus far, I think you have covered HTML and CSS, and you have understood the basic concepts of web design. With the introduction of JavaScript, you can add a bit of functionality to the website that you have designed. So we are moving or slowly transitioning from web design to web development. So what are the key terminologies that you need to familiarize yourself with? So the first one is front end and back end. So whatever you design using HTML and CSS is front end of the application. On the back end, you have something called a server where you can build APIs. So the APIs concept I will not go in detail, but I can tell you it's an application that runs on a server that connects to the database and that fulfills any request that the client's browser has. So for example, let's say let's consider Amazon for example. Um, let's say you wanted to search a product, you search the product, and what happens is that when you search a product, that query goes to the backend application, and the backend application fetches that information in the database and gives it to your browser. So on the browser has to get that information and present it to the user in a presentable format, right? So the front end in this case will be the Amazon's website, the Amazon's web application. So that will have three key elements. One is HTML, second is the CSS, and third is the JavaScript. So JavaScript is the one that is connecting to the back end so that we can fetch the data. The next thing is the user interface. So I think you already know this. User interface is the interface that you build using HTML and CSS so that the user can interact with your application. What is client-side and server-side scripting? So client-side scripting is like what we're going to do right now in this course is using JavaScript to manipulate the HTML files, that is the DOM, the document object model, and make sure we update any of the DOM elements on the fly when the data gets updated. So you'll have a much better understanding as we proceed in this course. The next thing we have to understand is what is the difference between libraries versus frameworks. So libraries can be short snippets of code that somebody else has written for us, and then we can just reuse it. So for example, jQuery is a library. So jQuery is nothing but superscript of JavaScript. I mean, I would not call it a superscript, that's a wrong word. Um, but it adds a bit more functionality on top of JavaScript so that the JavaScript can be used to manipulate the HTML and CSS. Framework is something that gives you a concrete structure to build out the entire front end of the application. So for example, let's consider Amazon again, for example. Let's say you want to build an application that has to support about 100,000 people at any given time, right? So you have entire east coast of US accessing Amazon as well as the west coast, and you want the application experience to be seamless, smooth, right? So in order to do that, you will rely on something called a framework. I mean, you can also code this using plain HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, but a framework gives you much more options to work with, and it allows you to handle multiple requests, and it's much more easier to build on top of framework than from scratch, for at least for project this size. But my recommendation is not to learn frameworks before you learn the key concepts of JavaScript. All right, so moving forward, what is the difference between static and dynamic websites? So static websites are usually your .org websites. I mean, technically they used to be .org websites at one point, where you just have some content written on the website, but you cannot do anything with it. But with dynamic websites, you can interact with that content. So for example, when you fill out a form and you get a response back, that is an example of a dynamic website. All right, so one of the terms that you will hear is full stack web development, and I mentioned earlier that I'm a full stack web developer at Indicate Digital. So what does full stack mean? So full stack is a stack of technologies that is used to perform a particular task. So for example, in our case of web application, the full stack will be HTML, CSS, JavaScript, one of the backend languages. So for example, consider Node.js that connects with a database. So let's consider MySQL as a database. So collection of these technologies creates a stack. So when you say a full stack web development, that means you work with all of these technologies, and a full stack web developer usually has to work with all these technologies. Web to mobile app development. I don't think this needs detailed explanation. Web is something uh, you run on uh, a browser, web browser, and mobile app is completely different, where you run your code on a mobile device. Java versus JavaScript. Okay, so this is very important. You have to understand Java is not in any way related to JavaScript. Java is a programming language that was invented at Sun Microsystems in early 90s, and JavaScript has been around again since early 90s, but JavaScript is completely different, and JavaScript runs in the web browser. Most of the part it used to run in the web browser, but in the recent years it has been adopted onto the backend uh, servers as well. But Java is purely a backend language, and Java is object oriented, while JavaScript is not. JavaScript is what you call a functional programming language. So the functional programming aspect, we will touch on a few things in this course about functional programming, but not a lot of them. So if you want to learn more about functional programming, you have to check out the advanced JavaScript course. So content management system. So what is a content management system? So I believe you may have checked out a few blog sites. So for example, there's a famous blog by Shane Parrish called Farnham Street Blog. Um, that blog is built entirely on a CMS platform like WordPress, right? So wherever you have to manage a lot of content that you have to post onto the website, this is where a CMS system comes in handy. And let's say you have multiple people writing and multiple people posting something onto the website, a CMS makes everybody's job easier. So let's do a quick refresh on HTML so that we can move ahead with JavaScript. So HTML, as you know, is hypertext markup language that is used to create web pages that will be rendered onto a web browser. And for any HTML document, the document itself is defined by a document object model, right? So we'll be working with this document object model throughout this course and be using JavaScript to make changes on to a HTML file using this document object model. So you can access the HTML elements using this document. So let's say if you wanted to make changes to the h1 tag here, I'm sorry, the h1 tag here that says my page, and let's say you wanted to change this, what you can do is you can select document and then move your cursor towards this h1 node and make changes to the content. So we'll go into the detail on how we can do this. Right, so we'll cover how to apply JS to DOM in session 4, as well as we'll cover in depth in all of our 3 projects. So what is JavaScript and how does it work? Right, so JavaScript is a programming language. I'm sure some of you might be already aware of what JavaScript is, but JavaScript has been around since the early 90s, but its potential wasn't fully realized until the late 90s. And right now we are seeing everywhere on the web browsers that JavaScript is being used heavily. So think of your Google Maps, for example, that you open on your web browser. The entire content is loaded by JavaScript. The entire navigation that you do onto this Google Maps application is being handled by JavaScript. So it's a very powerful language that you can learn. I'm not going to read this definition here. Um, you can read it, but it's always best to learn something rather than reading it. So let's move ahead. So what are JavaScript frameworks? So yeah, like I said before, when I made distinction between libraries and frameworks, frameworks are a collection, like a scaffold that is given to you by other people that you may build on top of it. Frameworks are particularly important if you're building a very large application. Um, so for example, let's consider Google Maps, right? So Google Maps can be built by using a framework that will be able to handle um, the key elements of the map, right? So one thing is you have to draw the map onto the canvas. So you have a canvas element that is being loaded every time you go to Google Maps, and you have to manipulate that canvas element, make changes to it as the user moves their cursor along, right? So a framework is a better tool to build such a vast application. So here are key examples of frameworks. Um, we have few courses on some of these frameworks that I encourage you to check out. But before you jump onto frameworks, it is always best to cover JavaScript thoroughly. All right, so set up an installation. So number one thing, like I mentioned before, make sure you are working on a computer and not on a tablet or a mobile device. Make sure you have Visual Studio Code installed. You can use any code editor that you want, but I highly recommend using Visual Studio Code. It will be easier to follow along with me because I'll be using Visual Studio Code, as well as install a good web browser like Google Chrome. The reason I say Google Chrome, you can use any browser you want, but the reason I say Google Chrome is because they provide very excellent development tools, and we will be playing with development tools a lot here. So here are the few resources that you can find to install these applications, depending on what operating system you're using. So this is currently my setup. I'll be using Mac OS operating system, a Google Chrome version of 80, and code editor of Visual Studio Code. So uh, keep in mind there will be improvements from time to time on these tools, and make sure you are able to adjust when there are changes to be made. All right, so what we did so far. So we understood the basic um, course structure that we're going to follow for this entire course. We are going to be learning the fundamentals of JavaScript. As I said before, you have to focus more on the fundamentals and not on the frameworks. You have to make sure that you practice, practice, and practice. And it's always best to learn something practically than reading just the definitions. Definitions do us no good in the world of programming. So in the next session, what we'll do is we'll cover some of the fundamentals of JavaScript programming. You may or may not be familiar with most of these, but we will go through all of them. So here are a few more JavaScript courses that you may take a look at, but I highly recommend you finish this course before you take any of these courses. This is a follow-up course. This is a much more advanced level of JavaScript. where we also cover a little bit of jQuery, that's a JavaScript library, JSON, that is a way you can uh, collect and send data between two applications, and Ajax, a way you can call on to the backend server to get more information from the database. All right, so this has been fun. I'll see you in the next session. Bye bye.